Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's my pleasure to bring back both Glen Little and Clay Nelson, who joined me this month to cover topics and discussion points that are all centered around the mindset that we need as we move into an agile way of working. So with that, Glenn, if you can just give a real brief recap of what you covered, and then Clay, I'll ask you to do the same thing.
Certainly. We talked, our main goal was to really talk about how the courses fit in with certifications and how what roles you would take and how you would fit in. And we talked very briefly at the end about the certification highway that we had proposed and what the training courses were along that particular highway and where you fit in, where you would jump on to that highway.
Thanks, Glenn. And Clay, if you could just introduce yourself and give a quick recap.
Sure. Yeah. Clay Nelson. I'm Vice President of Sales for GitHub for Central Region, which is Canada and Latin America and the middle part of the country. And last week we talked about the cultural changes that are necessary to adopt modern practices, the cultural changes inside of an enterprise, moving to more transparency away from sort of planned plan driven or command and control type structures, more emergent structures. And the trend that we see at GitHub of using the methods that are prevalent in the open source community within an enterprise to foster more innovation, more sort of a democratization of the ability to tackle technical debt and remove barriers so that developers have a better experience, and with that better experience, drive more innovation.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I will say to everyone that is in attendance live today, that with both, Glenn and Clay, as well as myself, I mean, we have a lot of experience and have seen a lot of organizations. I mean, I've known Clay for, I don't know, it's probably getting close to 20 years.
I think
And
it
so
is
Clay's
20.
done
Yeah.
yeah, Clay's done a lot of, a lot of consulting, being in a lot of organizations, and then in the current role and maybe other roles he's had as well, being able to see customers. So it's a rather wide breadth that can be answered from a question perspective. So without any further ado, I will get right into our Q&A and start asking or reiterating some of these questions. So Hordena asks, I'm a project manager and looking for work. I don't have any team experience with Agile. And most of what I know is from a Scrum Master course I took years ago at a previous employer. What can I do to make myself more marketable? I guess, Glenn, I'll direct that over to you since you were talking about the training superhighway.
Sure. Yeah. So on the highway that we discussed during the webinar, we had various jump on points, and you sound like you're sort of in the unpracticing CSM level based on the question. So I would suggest that you jump in and take the Process Mentors Bootcamp. And then follow that with the DASM, which is the DA Scrum Master. That will give you the agile background, both from an iterative perspective and a lean perspective, but it will also introduce you to DA and your choosing your way of working and how you can help out your teams. And certainly, even as a PM, while you may not play the Scrum role, understanding what the ceremonies are, understanding what the teams are doing, understanding what your role is as a manager for an agile team will come out of those trainings. So I don't want to jump into all of the details of that, obviously, but I would suggest that would be the next place if you're looking for employment, would be how do I bring agile to a project manager role? And both of those courses would provide you with that background.
Yeah, and we see a lot of project managers in our training courses. We obviously interact with a lot of project managers in organizations that we're supporting through coaching. And just as when we get to the end of the webinar today, I'll cover this in a little bit more. But our topic for next month for March is going to be project managers' journey to becoming agile. So we know that we get a lot of project managers that attend these webinars. And one of the things we'll be looking at as we get into March is both the training and what you can do to upskill yourself, make yourself more marketable, but also some of the common paths or options that you've got, right? Whether you're a project manager and your organization is again moving to an agile way of working, and what that might mean for you. Are you possibly going to be moving into something like what's sometimes called an agile delivery manager role, where you're still in a project-ish manager role, but your value that you add is going to be different than it might be today? Are you a project manager and possibly going to be looking to maybe move into a role on an agile team? Sometimes we see, project managers can make good team leads. Sometimes that they can make a good product owner. So we have some of those paths that we're going to cover and kind of get under the covers of that a little bit more. Clay, I know that you've seen a lot of project management. Anything else you'd like to contribute on that?
I guess maybe I'm making an assumption that that I shouldn't, but I think some of it depends on the level of your technical skill, what those paths are,
Right.
and what size organization you're comfortable working in. Because I think the smaller organization, the more requirement that you be more technical, because you've really got to wear multiple hats when you kind of move into an agile, because there's plenty of planning but less formality, as you all know.
Yeah.
and maybe not as much value is placed on the rigor that is kind of comes from a PMI style background. So I think it's really, you kind of have to, as you're figuring out where to go look, is be realistic about what your skill sets are and really where you want to be, a year from now. If you're more comfortable in that work, then it's going to kind of drive you to a certain size organization and a certain maturity with Agile.
Yeah.
In that where that organization is in their journey.
Sure. Yeah.
Next question is from Veston. Clay, you must see at your current customers, a lot of them that are either using Agile or not using Agile. Can you share your insights? And a second follow-on part of that is, for those that are using Agile, how many are using fake Agile?
So a lot of the clients that we work with on the enterprise side are the Fortune 1000. And inside of those, we find a complete bell curve of Agile adherence. But I would say more frequently than not, I still, 20 years later, still see more water scrum fall than I see what we, would describe as pure Agile. And that is, I think, changing and ever so gradually. And it usually still starts on that those teams that have the fewest technical constraints and dependencies on legacy systems, and but the more complexity there is and the more dependency there are, the more formality and the more we see lots of Agile in name, and as the work gets scoped, teams manage agilely, but then it still kind of falls back off into a lot of manual deployments or manual integrations with a infrastructure team, and again, complete huge range in the level of maturity we see. I mean, and it's usually I see it. Those industries that are under the most pressure to be digitized are the ones that have been the most aggressive. Retail have seen. I mention them because they're a case study. Home Depot is one where we've seen a complete transformation where they were really pretty waterfall and have really adopted what I would say is pretty mature Agile, and then we have other legacy companies that kind of break the mold. You kind of think of a old insurance company as maybe not being as quick to adopt these things, but Nationwide is one where they have a long history of being a leader in Agile. So we still see it all over the place, but if I had to give a score, I'd probably say on average we're still dealing with C's.
Yeah, I mean, no coincidence. We see a lot of the same, and from a the sort of organizational transformation work we do, it's always so much more challenging when you have that, which Scrum Fall or Agile in name only, especially when teams don't necessarily know that what they're doing is not really Agile yet. And so there's a bit of unlearning, and there's a bit of just, hey, we actually know what we're doing, but getting them again to shift more into the mindset of being open and let's try some things, or let's take a look at what this really means is always a big part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So our next question is from Kirk, and Kirk asks, I understand that DA is no longer an Agile framework. When did that happen? Is it now a process decision toolkit, and what is it? So Glenn, why don't you take that one?
Sure. DA is quite a long and sordid history at this point. It never really was a framework. It was one of those ones where we had a lot of trouble with naming DA and figuring out what to call it all the way along. And sort of in the day, everybody was coming out with frameworks, but it was probably 3 or 4 years ago now that it came down to, so what is it really? And people started to moving away from frameworks because they found them too structured, they found them too rigid. And DA was all about choice. It was all about being pragmatic. It was all about so calling it a framework just didn't resonate properly. And really, when we looked at it, since we're all about choice, it really is, okay, so what tool are you going to use? What are you going to pull out of the toolkit to use for your team? So it's probably 3 years ago now that we started talking about DA as a toolkit to allow you to choose your way of working. So it really is a different beast than things like SAFe or LESS or Scrum, where they actually are professing about, hey, this is the way you need to work. DA is really about looking at, okay, what works for you? What are you doing currently? Where are the problems, and what choices can we make to help smooth out the flow of the work through your organization? So, and the value stream work that we're now coming out with the new certification for, it is another layer on top of that provides you with the ability to analyze where you are as an organization, find out where things are flowing, where things aren't, and then focus in on how do we get the work flowing in a much more even way across your organization. So yeah, it's absolutely more, when we came up with the concept of a toolkit, it certainly it alleviated a lot of stress on justifying why we were a framework or why we weren't a framework. So
yeah. And Clay, does that sound a lot like way back when in the Roush Unified process, having a development case where you actually selected only the things that were going to add value and what you were going to do?
I was just thinking, so I think it was Sam Hunt, maybe. I remember having a conversation with a client came to me and said, I don't know what to put in this part of this vision document. And so it was sort of like, well, if you don't just fill these things out just because there's something here. And the quote was, if you need a template, don't use the template. If you don't need the template, use the template. And the idea was that, if you don't understand what it is that these things are useful for, you got to get down to the problem that you're trying to solve. And that's exactly right. I think that it's very easy to want things to be very prescriptive, but the reality is architectural constraints, organizational constraints, the organizational design, the culture, all these things are such huge variables. If you don't know those things and work backwards from them, very difficult to figure out, how to make changes.
Yeah. I just talking with a coach the other day, and they were a trainer actually. They were doing a training course, and they had walked through some various different exercises, and one of the people in the class had said, "Well, this is all well and good, but this isn't our situation. So, can we not provide you with this is our scenario, and in this class we can walk through how to solve this problem." That's not the point of training. Training is to give you the tools, to give you the knowledge, so that you then take it back and apply it in your own. Coming to the trainer and saying, "Hey, can you help us solve our problem?" Now you're requesting consulting services.
Yeah. Which is, all this lab work is set up this way. So,
yeah. Happy to help you out with consulting services, but training is about teaching you the toolkit so you can then go back and apply it to your circumstances, right? So,
yeah. So our next question is from Samuel. He says, "Josh, I've seen some posts on LinkedIn lately regarding training and instructors. One that really caught my eye was from somebody at scrum.org about checking out your instructors. What can you share about PMI Disciplined Agile instructors?" Yeah. So first of all, the instructors aren't from PMI. They're from authorized training partners. So the training partners with PMI have instructors, and instructors can be affiliated with more than one training company. But I'm seeing some of these posts as well. I actually saw something that I think Al Shalloway retweeted just this morning that kind of tied into this. So yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I recommend to anybody that's looking at training, and this is something I'll relate to what I've done myself, is check out your instructors, right? Are they trainers? Are they instructors? Do they have a lot of experience? Are they going to be able to, is this something you want them to be able to bring their own experience in, to be able to share the practical application of some of these things? So years ago when I took the SAFE SPC training, I did exactly that. I went out and looked on LinkedIn. I looked at the instructors that were offering the various courses that were going to fit the kind of the date and time and also the location, right? I wanted to be out west at that particular point in the year, west coast here in the US. And so I found an instructor that, based on his LinkedIn profile compared to some of the other ones I was looking at, really looked like he was going to do the type of delivery that I wanted. And sure enough, he was a fantastic instructor, had a wealth of information, was able to bring in all sorts of things from the customers that they've been serving. So, I mean, I'll say that for us, I mean, obviously Glen's an instructor, I'm an instructor. We've got a few other people I think are on the webinar today that are, delivering courses with us that have, the majority of the time over their careers, and what we do kind of day in and day out is working with organizations, working with teams, and that's all the stuff that we roll back into the course deliveries. So yes, I absolutely think that is something to make sure the hard-earned money you're spending and the time that you're taking to go through training, or your company's paying for, is absolutely do your due diligence. Let's see. Our next question is from Skip. What would be the makers of measures to let us know when our way of working is being disciplined? So Glenn, I'll turn that one back over to you and see what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's actually markers and measures, but so when we talk about choosing your way of working, one of the big things that we do emphasize, and again, I don't want to get into specific measures, but is typically the type of stuff you go through in a retrospective, where your team recognizes there's an issue, and then you can look at, okay, what are our options, and what do we think we want to do to try and solve this problem. But it's really important during that time that you actually say, okay, what does it mean to be successful? And there could be all sorts of different things. If it's hey, we're not getting stuff completed inside the iteration. Okay, so what do we do as a team to do that? Well, maybe we need to make our story smaller. Maybe we need to but we need to put a concrete measure on there that says, what does it mean that we made a change? How do we know that that change helped us to be successful? So each change you make needs to have, and there are various techniques that we do teach inside of the DASM and SSM courses that actually look at, so how do we get down from, okay, this is our goal, how do we get to the metrics that validates whether or not we met that goal? And I can't give you specific metrics right now because obviously it depends on the problem you're trying to solve. But yeah, metrics are really big in choosing your way of working. It isn't about randomly choosing something and seeing whether or not we feel that it's better. It really is about putting metrics in place to find out, did this improve it? Because you may make changes that don't provide you with any benefit. And so it's a question of, okay, we're doing something different, but is it better? And better really is, are we meeting our metrics? So yeah, metrics are really important. I'm not sure that really hit, but yeah, there you have to set expectations and targets and goals in order to become better. It's about continuously improving, not in continuously changing.
I mean, I would say one thing is the ability to measure inside of the iteration, inside of the sprint, engineering data, and not just project management data, is kind of important. I mean, that's trying to say this not as somebody who makes a living selling software, but it is if you the important thing for developers is these things to be captured as they're doing their natural work. You want these metrics to surface and then be able to assess whether or not you're making progress. So from our perspective, it's how frequently are things being contributed to the main branch for the iteration? How frequently are pull requests getting reviewed? How big are those pull requests? And because from our perspective, the code review process, and that code review is primarily a technical activity, but it generally also has input from non-technical participants. You don't want those things to be so big that nobody can review it, because then you're really not catching the quality issues that you're trying to catch. So you don't want those things to be so big that nobody has time to do it. Bite-sized chunks that are reviewable, and creating a velocity through there, and that those are if you have those types of metrics, you have you're showing that you're adhering to the practices of continuous integration and continuous testing. Those are, to me, the presence of those metrics and the ability to measure those symbolizes a level of maturity from just sort of baseline. Well, they said they're almost done. Yeah.
Right. Almost.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Our next question is from Dominic. Since the PMI acquisition, how would you rate the interest in DA? Higher than expected, lower, or about this? Higher than expected or lower? Yeah, I'll take a turn at this, and Glenn, you can also chime in. I definitely higher. I mean, obviously PMI has been able to raise the awareness that the value that DA has, and brought it to just a much bigger community. So I would say definitely higher. Now, is it more than expected? I would say my expectations are kind of high, so it can always be more, right? That's why we do these types of webinars and some of the other things that we do to help raise awareness in the community. But yeah, definitely higher. I don't know. What do you think, Glenn? You agree, disagree?
I personally have no way to measure that other than I can certainly tell you that the number of hits or number of views of my profile in LinkedIn has gone up exponentially over the last 6 months. But That's only from a personal perspective. You were talking about measures, right? Right, Clay?
Right.
I'm looking at trends as opposed to static measures. And but in discussions with Mark Lyons, he's saying that they're seeing just unfounded amount of interest in DA, that to a point where it's sort of blowing them away how much interest there is in DA now that PMI has taken over DA. So, all things good, right? The more interest there is, the the better the product is going to be. So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. We're getting kind of close on time, but I think we can at least get to one or two more of these. Let's see. Bana asks, what is the biggest challenge with getting to the mindset of Agile? Yeah, I think we can each of us take a quick pass at this. So, Clay, what do you think?
I think for me, it is, how comfortable are you with not knowing something? Can you personally deal with ambiguity? Because there's going to be ambiguity.
yeah.
And if you can't get through that, and like everything has to be figured out before you feel comfortable starting, you're gonna struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would agree. In DA, we used to have a iceberg picture all the time, and you have to get used to being able to move ahead, only knowing the 10% that you can see above the water.
Right. Yeah.
I have worked with people over my career that felt paralyzed because unless I know the total solution, I don't know how to get started, right? And those are people who struggle with Agile, because really it is about let's plan as far as we need to get started.
You'll learn something about options theory, right?
Yeah. And because by the time we make those other decisions, we're going to know more.
Right.
And so now we're making informed decisions as opposed to building decisions on false assumptions all the way along, like we do in what they refer to as predictive project management, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we're going to sit down now and plan out a whole year's worth of project. Well, day 2, the plan falls apart.
And you keep people on that march because, well, that's what my measurements are set to,
Well,
right?
That's what we spent 6 months producing. Yeah, and for me, I'd also say that it's how comfortable are you learning something new, and not just a new way of working, but are you comfortable learning how to do other things? Gather other skills. Are you going to be open to kind of pitching in and saying I can help with that, right? So I think that's also one of the things that a lot of people do struggle with. They've spent a lot of time, right, getting to a point in their career with a certain amount of experience in a titled position or something. They've seen that, if I keep moving along and doing this, I can get to that next level. And then all of a sudden, whoa, and not, we're doing Agile, and now I've got to do some other things, or things that I might have done, when I was much junior in my career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to be prepared to be, there's no longer moving through your career as, hey, I'm becoming a specialist in this or a specialist in that.
Right.
Now I'm a team member is the top of the career.
Yeah. There's a lot of research on the value of generalists, and I think that's the key, is you've got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable in something. And then you got to have a culture that supports that, where, that truly that growth mindset that says, all right, you screwed this up because you've never done that before. But the good news is we didn't invest for the full project yet. We only invested for that tip of the iceberg. And so the loss is minimal. So that's why it's an ecosystem that's got to kind of be supportive to allow that to happen.
But when people do, one of the biggest transition areas, though, is they have to be able to be comfortable moving from what they're doing now to something different. And every role we talk about in Agile requires a transition from what you're doing now to doing something different and thinking about something different. And
constantly thinking about something different, because we're going to keep improving.
Yep. Yeah. And that's the whole mindset, is not a question of we're going to move over to that new static position, but in fact that we're going to constantly looking at how do we change, how do we how do we improve, and it's moving into that mindset where, hey, this isn't, what we're doing is never good enough, and how do we make it better, is a huge transition for a lot of people. And I'm not sure who asked, but one of the tradition, if you're a traditional project manager, it's quite a transition. And I've been there. I was a technical project manager for many years, before and during doing Agile, and making that tradition or transition over to being a team lead or being a coach or being a scrum master. It is a big transition from a project manager where you're in control and you have say.
I hadn't seen a PERT chart in a long time.
Yeah. So we have a lot. Kirk, I know you asked, I think I see at least 2 more questions, and Robin, Andre, Pat, we will get your questions answered. We'll do that out on the forum. I know we're just slightly over time. So before I pull up a bit of what we're going to be doing again next month, I want to thank Clay and Glenn again for coming and taking the time away from your busy days to appear here today. So I really appreciate it.
That's a fun conversation.
Happy to be here. Yep.
Yeah, let me let's see here. So as I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, so one of the very first questions we had was pretty timely. And again, we are seeing so many project managers that are interested in learning more about Agile, and part of that's, because obviously PMI, bringing a lot of project managers awareness up on why this is important to start learning and start getting value from. So March, Project Manager's Journey to Becoming Agile. One of our speakers will be a vice president of training at a really large PMI chapter, somebody who's done a lot of consulting, a lot of training in the Agile space and in lots of different Agile frameworks. So his perspective that he's going to be able to bring is really, really interesting. We have 2 executives at a really large organization that are going to talk about what they've been doing to be able to transition. Like, again, when's a project manager no longer a project manager? So we've got some really good things that we're going to be looking at in March. And as always, I would like to say, please come see us at allthingsda.com, our community forum that you can, share your thoughts, ask questions, take a look at some of the other things that are being posted out there. Of course, visit us at Process Mentors for any types of training, consulting, agility, health checks. We have a number of trainings and a lot of consulting packages also for non-software development and value delivery using an Agile way of working. So if you're viewing this live or you're watching us recorded, we have a lot there. And Glenn and I have a lot of training coming up, so you can see our course offerings as well. And with that, again, thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Clay. Thank you, everybody who came in and asked questions and stayed on the webinar today. And hope to see you when we regroup in March. Thanks, everyone.